The wind cut through the sawtooth mountains like a blade seeking bone, carrying with it the scent of pine and the promise of snow. Captain Alara Ashford stood motionless on the ridgeline. Her body blended so completely with the landscape that even the elk grazing 200 meters below hadn't detected her presence. Through her spotting scope, she tracked the herd's movement with the patient precision of someone who had learned long ago that survival belonged to those who could become invisible. But Elle wasn't watching the elk. Her scope shifted almost imperceptibly to the left, sweeping across the valley floor where 6 men moved through the wilderness with a rhythm that had nothing to do with hiking and everything to do with 20 years of military training. They wore civilian gear, expensive outdoor brands that screamed tourist, but their spacing was tactical. Their hand signals were precise, and every third step the point man cleared his corners like he was moving through Fallujah instead of Idaho backcountry. Navy SEALs. Had to be. This deep and restricted wilderness, moving with that kind of discipline, there was no other explanation. Elle's mismatched eyes, one the color of a storm-dark sea, the other pale gray like winter ice, narrowed as she tracked them. The heterochromia that had made her a target for bullies as a child now served as her most distinctive feature, the kind of detail that people remembered when they needed to identify Ghost Hawk. Not that anyone had identified her in 3 years. Not since Syria, not since Garrett. Her hand moved unconsciously to the antique pocket watch resting against her chest, suspended on a worn leather cord beneath her shirt. She didn't need to open it to know what time it showed. The watch had stopped at 14:37 on a burning afternoon 3 years ago, the exact moment an airstrike had obliterated a Syrian compound, and supposedly her husband along with it. She still wound it every morning. Muscle memory, ritual, penance. The radio at her hip crackled with intercepted communications, and Elle's attention sharpened. The SEAL team was using proper protocol, encrypted frequencies, rolling codes. Professional. But what made her blood run cold wasn't their communication. It was the other frequency, the one they didn't know existed, where 53 voices coordinated in tight, clipped sentences that spoke of ambush positions and kill zones and American equipment as trophies. Militia. Anti-government extremists who'd been operating in these mountains for the past 6 months, ever since the federal government had tried to enforce new land use restrictions. Elle had been tracking them for weeks, documenting their movements, passing anonymous tips to local law enforcement through carefully constructed dead drops. But this was different. This wasn't posturing or training exercises. This was an execution waiting to happen. Elle swept her scope across the 3 ridgelines that formed a natural amphitheater around the valley's narrowest point. There, the glint of metal partially concealed by pine branches. And there, the telltale disturbance of recently moved earth where a heavy weapon had been dug in. And there, and there, and there. 12 positions that she could identify, which meant at least 20 she couldn't see. The SEALs were walking into a perfectly constructed kill box, and they had no idea the trap had already been set. She checked her watch, the modern tactical one on her wrist, not Garrett's stop timepiece over her heart. The SEAL team would reach the fatal funnel in approximately 4 hours and 17 minutes if they maintained their current pace. 4 hours to warn them. 4 hours to convince them that a woman with mismatched eyes and dirt under her fingernails knew more about their operational security than they did. The memory of Syria rose unbidden, as it always did when she faced impossible choices. Garrett's voice on the radio, steady even as explosions bracketed his position. Go, Elle. Mission needs you to survive, not me. The sound of his breathing, labored but controlled, as he called in coordinates for an airstrike on his own location. The final words that had haunted her for 3 years. Tell Rowan I love her. Keep my watch. Keep fighting, babe. She had kept the watch. She had kept fighting. But Rowan... Elle forced the thought away, locked it in the same mental compartment where she kept all the grief that would destroy her if she let it breathe. She'd been told her daughter was stillborn, that the stress of deployment and the complications of a difficult pregnancy had claimed the child before Elle ever got to hold her. The medical documents had seemed legitimate, the death certificate official. But sometimes in the darkest hours before dawn, Elle wondered if that had been another lie in a war built on deception. These 6 men walking into an ambush were very much alive, and if she didn't act, they would join the ghosts that haunted these mountains. She began the descent toward the SEAL team's position, moving through the forest like smoke, like memory, like the ghost she had become. The flashback hit her halfway down the mountain, triggered by the angle of afternoon light through the pines. Suddenly, she wasn't in Idaho anymore. She was in Syria, 3 years ago, pressed flat against sun-baked stone while bullets chewed up the wall above her head. "Elle, you need to move," Garrett's voice in her earpiece, urgent but controlled. Always controlled. That was what had made him the perfect spotter, the perfect partner, the perfect husband. He could watch the world burning and still calculate wind speed and barometric pressure with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. "Not without you," Elle's voice, hoarse from dust and cordite smoke. Her rifle, Reckoning she called it, was almost too hot to touch, the barrel glowing from sustained fire. They were surrounded, 60-plus ISIS fighters closing in from all sides, and their extraction window had closed 20 minutes ago. "The mission needs you to complete it," Garrett said, and she could hear something in his voice that made her stomach drop. Finality. Decision. "I'm calling in the airstrike, on our position. You have 90 seconds to get clear." "Garrett, no." "That's an order, Captain." And there it was, the command voice he'd only used twice in their 6 years together. Once during a training exercise when she'd frozen on a shot. Once now, when he was saving her life by ending his own. "I love you. Tell Rowan I love her. Keep my watch. Keep fighting, babe." The explosion had lit up the Syrian desert like a second sun, and Elle had run through the flames and the screaming and the chaos with tears streaming down her face and Garrett's pocket watch clutched in her bloodied hand. The Marines had listed him as KIA based on the crater where his position had been. A hole in the earth deep enough to bury a truck, surrounded by debris that had once been human beings, but was no longer identifiable as such. No body had been recovered. But then, there wouldn't have been anything left to recover. Elle came back to herself standing at the edge of a clearing, her hand pressed against the rough bark of a pine tree, breathing hard. 3 years and the memory still had the power to drop her to her knees. 3 years, and she could still hear his voice, still smell the cordite, still feel the heat of the explosion washing over her, retreating back. She checked her tactical watch. 3 hours and 42 minutes until the SEALs reached the kill zone. Time to move. The SEAL team had established a temporary halt position in a natural depression that offered minimal cover but good sightlines. Elle approached from the east, making enough noise to avoid being mistaken for a threat, but not so much that she appeared incompetent. She needed them to take her seriously, which meant she needed to appear capable but not dangerous. Concerned citizen, wildlife researcher, someone who belonged in these mountains but posed no threat to their operational security. She had her topographical map clutched in trembling hands, deliberately trembling, a woman out of her depth, and her civilian hiking clothes were appropriately worn, but not tactical. Her spotting scope was concealed in her pack, replaced by consumer-grade binoculars that any birdwatcher might carry. The rifle, Garrett's rifle, Vigilance, the one that never missed, was hidden 300 meters back in a carefully camouflaged cache. Ghost Hawk carried custom weapons. Wildlife researchers carried cameras and field guides. The point man spotted her first, his hand going up in a closed fist that froze the entire team. Elle saw the smooth way they melted into defensive positions, the economy of movement that spoke of countless hours of training. Professional, disciplined, and completely unprepared for what was about to happen to them. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area." The team leader stepped forward, and Elle recognized the type immediately. Mid-40s, salt and pepper beard, eyes that had seen too much combat to be impressed by a woman with dirt under her fingernails. He was tall, 6'2" at least, and used his height the way some men did, looming to establish dominance. "You need to return to the main trail immediately." Elle let her hands shake a little more as she spread the topographical map on a nearby boulder. Her voice came out higher than normal, breathless with manufactured anxiety. "Please, you need to listen to me. I've been tracking unusual activity in this area for the past 3 weeks. I've documented at least 50 armed men moving through these passes since dawn. They're not locals. They're organized and they're setting up positions." The commander's laugh was harsh enough to scatter a pair of ravens from a nearby pine. And who exactly are you supposed to be? The mountain's personal tour guide? Some kind of military expert with your bird-watching binoculars? The rest of the team chuckled, the sound mixing with the wind in a symphony of dismissal that Elle had heard variations of her entire career. She'd heard it at Scout Sniper School when she'd outshot every man in her class. She'd heard it on her first deployment when a colonel had suggested she'd be more useful handling communications than handling a rifle. She'd heard it 1,000 times, and it never got easier to swallow. But she swallowed it now because 6 lives depended on her ability to absorb insults with grace. "I'm a wildlife researcher," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the trembling hands. "I've been tracking elk migration patterns and documenting golden eagle nesting sites. But I know what I've seen." Her finger traced the elevation lines on the map with surprising precision, years of tactical training bleeding through her civilian cover. "These positions here, here, and here, they've been setting up since yesterday. Heavy weapons, machine gun nests. This whole valley is becoming a kill box." A younger man stepped forward, red-haired, freckled, with a kind of aggressive masculinity that compensated for insecurity. His name tape read, Hartwell. "Listen, lady, we've been doing this since you were probably in college studying bunny rabbits or whatever. We don't need some tree hugger telling us how to read terrain." He snatched the map from her hands with more force than necessary and made a show of examining it before crumpling it into a ball. "Why don't you go back to counting endangered butterflies and leave the real work to professionals?" He tossed the wadded map at her feet, and it landed in the dirt like discarded trash. Elle bent to retrieve it, her movements controlled despite the rage building behind her ribs. When she straightened, something flickered in her eyes, something cold and deadly that came from 317 confirmed kills and a husband who died so she could live. It was gone before anyone could identify it, replaced by the worried expression of a civilian out of her depth. But one man had noticed. The Master Chief, Mercer, his name tape read, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of multiple combat deployments, paused mid-chuckle. There was something in the way she'd bent to retrieve the map, the way her body had instinctively shifted weight to her back foot while maintaining eye contact. It was the stance of someone trained to take a hit and keep standing, the stance of someone who knew how to fight. "Ma'am," the commander said, moving closer and using his height advantage to loom over her 5'5" frame. His breath smelled of coffee and arrogance. "I appreciate your concern for our safety, but we're professionals conducting authorized operations in this area. I suggest you return to your research station and stay out of military operational zones. This isn't a national park, and we're not here to babysit civilians who think they know better than trained operators." Elle tried one more time, her voice quiet but urgent. "Please, at least call for backup. Change your route. I've seen what happens when—" She caught herself, biting her lip on words that would have revealed too much. The commander leaned in, using proximity as intimidation. "When what? When you watched some war documentary? When you read about it in your sociology textbook?" His eyes raked over her, cataloging and dismissing in the same glance. "Get back to your base camp, wherever that is, and stay out of areas where professionals are working. Consider this your official warning." One of the other team members, Blackwood, according to his name tape, with the quiet watchfulness of a sniper, stepped forward. His hand on her elbow was firm but not rough as he guided her toward the jeep they'd hidden in a nearby stand of trees. "Ma'am, for your own safety, you need to clear this area." Elle pulled a small notebook from her pocket as they walked, tearing out a page covered in coordinates and tactical observations. "These are the positions I've mapped. Please, just look at them. I know you don't believe me, but—" She held the paper out to Blackwood, who glanced at the commander for guidance. The commander made a dismissive gesture, and Blackwood let the paper fall to the ground where the wind caught it and sent it skittering across the rocks. "The only life you need to worry about saving is your own," the commander called out as she climbed into the passenger seat of the jeep. "These mountains aren't safe for civilians. Consider this your official warning to clear out." As the jeep's engine started and the vehicle began bumping down the rocky trail, Elle turned for one last look. The Master Chief, Mercer, was staring after her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Something about that woman bothered him, she could tell. something beyond her warnings. The bitter irony of the commander's words would haunt him in exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes, when these mountains became a death trap that only one person could save them from. Elle waited until the jeep was out of sight before she slipped into the forest and began the sprint back to her hidden position. She moved through the wilderness with the kind of speed that came from knowing every game trail, every fallen log, every patch of loose scree that could betray your position with a single misstep. This was her territory. She'd been operating in these mountains for 3 years, ever since Garrett's death had sent her running from everything she'd known. The cabin appeared so gradually that most people would have walked past it 3 times without noticing. It was built into the side of a ridge, partially underground, covered with living sod and strategically placed vegetation. Solar panels camouflaged as rock formations. Satellite dish hidden under what looked like a dead tree. To any casual observer, it was just another piece of the mountainside. Inside, it was something else entirely. Elle stripped off her civilian clothes and pulled on tactical pants and a long-sleeve shirt in mottled gray-green that would blend with the forest. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency, checking equipment that she maintained with the kind of religious devotion that kept operators alive in hostile territory. Kestrel weather meters showing wind speeds at various elevations. Military-grade rangefinder accurate to 3,000 meters. Notebook filled with range cards marking every significant terrain feature in the valley. Every distance pre-calculated, every wind pattern memorized. And there, partially hidden beneath a tan canvas cloth, the rifles. Elle pulled back the covering with reverent hands. 2 weapons lay side by side like lovers in sleep. Reckoning, her personal rifle, a custom Remington 700 with a barrel that had cost more than most people's cars, and a scope that could resolve a target's facial features at 2,000 meters. And Vigilance, Garrett's rifle, the one he'd carried through 6 years of operations, the one that bore his initials carved into the stock and his careful adjustments still marked on the scope. She chose Vigilance. If she was going to do this, if she was going to break 3 years of careful anonymity to save 6 men who dismissed her as worthless, she needed Garrett's luck more than her own precision. The radio beside her crackled to life, and a familiar, gravelly voice filled the small space. "Ellie, you there? Don't make me drive up that mountain." Despite everything, Elle smiled. Colonel Francis Whitmore had been part of her life for so long that she couldn't remember a time without him. He'd been her father's best friend, the man who'd stood beside a flag-draped coffin when a training accident at Quantico had claimed Medal of Honor recipient Captain Jonathan Brennan in 1992. He'd been the one to find 8-year-old Alara sitting in her father's study, holding a photograph and crying silent tears that spoke of a grief too large for words. He'd taught her to shoot when she was 10, taught her to survive when she was 12, taught her that warriors came in all shapes and sizes when the rest of the world was trying to convince her that girls didn't belong on rifle ranges. Now at 68, with a slight limp from shrapnel he'd taken during Operation Desert Storm, and a mind still sharp as broken glass, Frank Whitmore ran a survival training school in the valley below, while quietly serving as the only person on Earth who knew that Ghost Hawk was alive and operating in these mountains. "I'm here, Frank," Elle said, keying the radio. "We've got a problem." The SEALs. It wasn't a question. Whitmore always seemed to know what was happening in his mountains before Elle did. "Ran into them yesterday. Commander Brecken Hayes. Used to train under me at Coronado. Smart kid, but arrogant. Forgot every lesson I tried to teach him about humility. They're walking into an ambush, Frank. 50-plus militia fighters, heavy weapons, prepared positions. I tried to warn them." There was a long pause. When Whitmore spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a man who'd made impossible decisions for 50 years and learned to live with the consequences. And they didn't listen. "Hayes practically laughed in my face, had one of his men escort me out like I was some hysterical civilian. So the question is," Whitmore said slowly, "are you going to let them die?" Elle looked at Garrett's rifle, at the initials carved into the stock, at the watch resting against her chest that had stopped ticking 3 years ago. She thought about Syria, about watching helplessly as the man she loved called fire down on his own position, about the promise she'd made in the aftermath, to keep fighting, to keep protecting, to make sure his sacrifice meant something. "You know I can't do that," she said quietly. She heard Whitmore's sigh, could picture him standing in his office surrounded by photographs of Marines, long dead, and battles long finished. "Then do what Garrett trained you for. I'll cover your six from town. But Ellie, once you pull that trigger, once they figure out who you are, there's no going back. 3 years of anonymity, gone. Ghost Hawk becomes real again." She never stopped being real, Frank. She just learned to hide better. "Your call, kid. I'll be monitoring their frequency. And Ellie, make every shot count." The radio went silent, and Elle was alone with her ghosts and her rifles and her choice. She gathered her equipment with the methodical precision of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. The hide she'd constructed 4 days ago was perfect. A natural depression on a ridgeline 1,600 meters above the valley floor and 1,800 meters south of the kill zone. She'd built it gradually, moving one stone at a time, one branch at a time, until it blended so completely with the landscape that even someone standing 3 meters away would struggle to identify it as man-made. Inside, she had everything she needed. Range cards for 23 different positions, each one marked with distance, elevation change, and expected wind pattern. Spare magazines for both rifles, though she'd be using Vigilance today. Water and high-calorie food that wouldn't spike her blood sugar or make her hands shake. And the Kestrel weather meter that would tell her wind speeds at different elevations, crucial information for shots at extreme distance. Elle settled into position and began her pre-shot ritual. Deep breathing to slow her heart rate. Visual meditation to clear her mind of everything except the task ahead. Mental rehearsal of the first 5 shots, seeing them in her mind before her finger ever touched the trigger. Through her spotting scope, she could see everything. The militia positions were even more extensive than she'd feared. 12 she'd identified earlier, but now she could see at least 7 more. Heavy machine guns, DSHK, 12.7 millimeters, she noted with grim recognition. Positioned to create overlapping fields of fire. RPG teams set up to take out any vehicles. Sniper positions with clear lines of sight down the valley's length. And there, moving with casual confidence into the center of the kill zone, 6 Navy SEALs who had no idea they were being tracked by 60 rifles and had maybe 90 seconds left to live. Elle's hand moved to Garrett's watch, pressing it against her chest. "Help me out here, babe," she whispered. "I'm going to need your eyes today." She uncovered Vigilance and settled the rifle into position, the stock fitting against her shoulder with the familiarity of an old friend. The scope was already zeroed, Garrett's careful calculations still perfect after 3 years. She'd maintained this rifle with religious devotion, cleaning it weekly, checking the zero monthly, keeping it ready for a day she'd hoped would never come. The first shot would come from the militia. She couldn't fire first without giving away her position too early. So she waited, her breathing slow and steady, her heart rate dropping into the zone that shooters called the calm. Pre-calculated ranges scrolled through her mind. 1,847 meters to the primary machine gun position, 1,923 meters to the secondary, 2,105 meters to the RPG team. Wind from the west at her elevation, shifting to northwest down in the valley. Temperature dropping as the afternoon progressed, which would affect bullet trajectory. Through the scope, she watched the SEAL team reach the narrowest part of the valley. The point man, Mercer, the Master Chief who'd almost recognized something in her, had stopped, his head turning slowly as instinct finally overcame training. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones, in the pricking of his skin, in the sudden absence of birdsong that meant predators were near. But it was too late. The militia commander, a man Elle had identified weeks ago as Cade Mason, ex-Army Ranger who'd gone off the rails after a dishonorable discharge, raised his hand in the universal signal for fire. The valley erupted in violence so sudden and overwhelming that for a moment the world seemed to pause in shock. Mercer went down hard, blood spreading across his left shoulder, where a 7.62 millimeter round had punched through muscle and cracked bone. The reaction was instant and professional. The SEALs scattered for whatever cover they could find, returning fire at muzzle flashes that seemed to come from everywhere at once. But the cover was minimal, the enemy position superior, and the volume of incoming fire overwhelming. Another SEAL went down, Graves, the team medic, clutching his leg where a round had torn through his thigh. They were completely surrounded, exactly as Elle had warned them, caught in a perfect kill box with no way out. Elle's first shot was a whisper of death, traveling at 2,800 feet per second. The militia machine gunner who'd been laying down the heaviest fire simply collapsed, his weapon going silent. Through her scope, Elle saw the confusion on his loader's face, the split second of incomprehension before her second shot took him as well. 2 down in 3 seconds, and the militia still hadn't figured out they were taking fire from an unexpected direction. Her third shot was more difficult, an RPG gunner who was about to fire at the SEAL's inadequate cover. The range was 2,015 meters, the target partially concealed, moving slightly as he adjusted his aim. Elle led him perfectly, accounting for his movement in the crosswind, squeezing the trigger in the space between heartbeats. The RPG gunner dropped his weapon and fell backward, the rocket-propelled grenade clattering harmlessly against rocks, instead of turning 6 American warriors into scattered meat. In the valley below, Master Chief Mercer's head snapped up, his combat-honed instincts recognizing the distinctive crack of a long-range precision rifle. "We've got a shooter on the mountain," he called out, his voice tight with pain from his wounded shoulder. "Unknown position, unknown friendly or hostile." But Commander Hayes was too focused on immediate survival to process what that might mean. His team was pinned down, ammunition expenditure was critical, and 2 of his men were bleeding. The mysterious sniper would have to wait. Elle worked methodically, her breathing controlled, her movements economical. Each shot was a calculation of distance, wind, elevation, target movement, and 100 other variables that her brain processed faster than conscious thought. This was what Garrett had trained her for, what her previous successful missions had prepared her for. This was Ghost Hawk, emerging from 3 years of hiding to remind the world why certain legends never truly died. Shot 4. The militia spotter who was trying to triangulate her position. He'd been smart, using a signal mirror to coordinate with other fighters. Not smart enough. The mirror's flash gave away his location, and Elle's bullet found him before he could report what he'd seen. Shot 5 and 6. A 2-man team manning a PKM machine gun that had the SEALs completely pinned. Elle took the gunner first, then the assistant gunner who tried to take over the weapon. Both dropped within 2 seconds of each other, their machine gun falling silent. Shot 7. A radio operator calling for reinforcements. Can't have that. 7 shots in 45 seconds. Each one perfect. Each one eliminating a key target. The militia fighters began to realize they were taking fire from an unexpected direction, their heads swiveling as they tried to locate this new threat. Some turned their weapons toward the mountain, spraying rounds in her general direction, but nowhere close to her actual position. The volume of fire on the SEALs decreased by half as confusion spread through enemy ranks like a virus. "Whoever's up there, keep shooting," Hayes yelled into his radio, not knowing if the unknown sniper could hear him, but desperate enough to try. His team was still pinned down, Graves was bleeding badly despite field dressing, and their ammunition was running dangerously low. But the mysterious sniper had given them breathing room, and Hayes was too much of a professional to waste it. Elle shifted positions slightly, knowing she had maybe another minute before someone competent figured out her location. Through her scope, she could see a militia sub-commander organizing a squad to flank the SEAL's position. She led him perfectly, accounting for his movement and the wind, squeezing the trigger between heartbeats. The man dropped mid-stride, and his squad scattered in panic, their flanking maneuver abandoned. But Elle could also see more fighters moving in from the east, reinforcements that would overwhelm the SEALs regardless of her intervention. At least 20 fresh militia members, well-armed and moving with discipline that suggested military training. These weren't weekend warriors playing soldier. These were veterans, probably former military like Mason, who knew how to assault a fortified position. The SEALs had perhaps 30 rounds between them. It wouldn't be nearly enough. Through her scope, Elle saw one of the smarter militia fighters using a signal mirror to coordinate with others, trying to triangulate her position based on the sound of her shots. The flash of light gave him away, and her next round removed him from the equation. But his idea spread. Soon, multiple fighters were trying to locate her position using sound and logic. Time was running out. Elle made a decision that went against every principle of sniper fieldcraft she'd ever learned. Instead of remaining hidden, she deliberately skylined herself for exactly 2 seconds, letting the militia see her silhouette against the afternoon sky. The reaction was immediate and exactly what she'd hoped for. Dozens of rifles swung toward her position, fighters pointing and shouting. And most importantly, Cade Mason himself stood up from his protected position to look, his tactical vest clearly visible through her scope, his face showing the confusion of a commander whose perfect ambush had turned into a nightmare. The shot was 2,247 meters through variable crosswind and heat shimmer that made the air dance like water. It should have been impossible, but Elle had made harder shots in worse conditions when other lives had depended on her. She whispered 3 words, "For you, Garrett," and squeezed the trigger. Cade Mason's head snapped back as the bullet took him just below the collarbone, punching through his tactical vest and severing his aorta. He was dead before he hit the ground, and his militia's command structure died with him. The psychological impact was devastating. Their leader, killed from an impossible distance by a ghost they couldn't see or reach. The militia forces began to fragment, some continuing the attack, while others pulled back in confusion and fear. The disciplined assault became a disorganized firefight, and in that chaos, Commander Hayes saw his opportunity. "Fighting withdrawal," he ordered, his command voice cutting through the gunfire. "Pairs, bounding overwatch, move to rally point echo." They moved like the elite warriors they were, one man covering while another moved, professional even with 3 wounded and ammunition nearly exhausted. The mysterious sniper continued to provide cover, every shot eliminating someone who tried to pursue them. But Elle's position was finally compromised. She could see a squad of militia fighters moving up the mountain toward her, using proper bounding overwatch techniques that suggested serious military training. They'd be at her hide in approximately 5 minutes. She had time to disappear, to become the wildlife researcher again, to maintain the fiction that had kept her safe for 3 years. Instead, she stayed in position for one more shot. The militia had set up a new machine gun position that would cut the SEALs down if they tried to reach their extraction point. It was a difficult shot, the gunner partially concealed behind rocks, only a small portion of his upper body exposed. But she'd made harder shots in worse conditions when other lives had depended on her. Vigilance spoke one final time, and the machine gun went silent. Then Elle was moving, breaking down her shooting position with practiced efficiency, erasing what evidence she could. But she wasn't retreating to safety. She was repositioning to a secondary hide she'd established days earlier, because the SEALs still needed cover to reach their extraction point, and she'd be damned if she was going to let them die just because they'd been too arrogant to listen to a warning. As she moved through the rocks with the sure-footedness of someone who knew every stone and shadow, her mind processed the tactical situation with cold precision. The SEALs had maybe 10 minutes of ammunition left at their current rate of fire. The helicopter would need at least 15 minutes to reach them once called. The math didn't work unless someone kept the militia suppressed, and she was the only one in position to do it. Her radio crackled with American military communications on a frequency she'd been monitoring since the ambush started. Hayes's voice, no longer arrogant but carrying the desperate professionalism of a soldier trying to keep his men alive against impossible odds. Any station, this is Talon 7. We are taking heavy fire and need immediate extraction. 3 wounded, ammunition critical. Unknown friendly sniper providing support, but we're about to be overrun. Request immediate QRF and air support. How copy? Elle could have responded, could have identified herself, could have coordinated properly, but that would mean admitting that Ghost Hawk was alive, was here, was the woman they dismissed as a hysterical civilian. Instead, she reached her secondary position, a natural depression 300 meters from her first hide, and settled in with the militia squad still searching for her original location. Through her scope, she could see the entire battlefield, the SEALs fighting their way toward the extraction point, the militia trying to cut them off, and incoming, barely visible against the afternoon sun, the beautiful sight of a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter racing toward the coordinates Hayes had transmitted. But the helicopter was still 8 minutes out, and the SEALs were about to run completely dry on ammunition. Elle's hand tightened on Garrett's rifle, and she began to fire again, each shot buying precious seconds. A militia fighter, hidden in the rocks she'd already cleared, rose suddenly with his rifle aimed at the SEAL's retreat path. Elle saw him, swung her aim, but he fired first. She felt the impact, a burning line across her left ribs that knocked her breath away. Her return shot took him down, but the damage was done. Blood began seeping through her shirt, warm and wet against her skin. She pressed her hand against the wound, not deep, but bleeding. She'd need to move soon before blood loss became a problem. But the SEALs still needed cover, and she wasn't leaving until they were safe. In the valley below, Master Chief Donovan Mercer, bleeding from his shoulder wound but still fighting, heard the distinctive crack of that same precision rifle and looked up toward the mountain. Through the chaos and gunfire and his own pain, one thought crystallized with absolute clarity. That's her. The woman with the mismatched eyes. The one we threw out. She's saving us. And in that moment, Donovan Mercer understood exactly what kind of warrior they had dismissed, and exactly how badly they had failed the most important lesson Frank Whitmore had ever tried to teach them. Some heroes don't look like heroes, and sometimes the people you underestimate are the only ones who can save you. The helicopter's arrival changed everything and nothing. The UH-60 Black Hawk thundered over the eastern ridge like a mechanical angel, its door gunners already laying down suppressive fire that chewed up the militia positions with devastating efficiency. But the aircraft was taking fire from at least a dozen positions, tracer rounds arcing through the air like deadly fireflies, and Elle could see another RPG team setting up on the eastern slope. If they got that rocket off, 8 Americans would die in a fireball of twisted metal and burning aviation fuel. Elle didn't hesitate. She shifted her aim, her breathing already in the rhythm that turned conscious thought into pure action. The RPG gunner was steadying his weapon, his loader crouched beside him with a second rocket ready. The range was 1,847 meters, with a quartering crosswind that would push the bullet right unless she compensated. Her finger found the trigger's natural breakpoint, that perfect place where the mechanism would release without disturbing her aim. The crosshairs settled on the gunner's center mass, accounting for wind drift in the slight downward angle. Vigilance pushed back against her shoulder with familiar violence. Through the scope, she watched the gunner slump forward over his weapon, the RPG sliding from nerveless fingers. The loader stared at his dead companion for a frozen moment before her second shot took him as well. The RPG team was neutralized, but Elle could see more militia fighters repositioning, bringing their weapons to bear on the hovering helicopter. She worked methodically, each shot a calculated decision about which target posed the greatest threat. A fighter with a heavy machine gun aimed at the Black Hawk's tail rotor. Another with what looked like a Russian-made Dragunov sniper rifle, trying to take out the pilot. A third who was coordinating movements via radio, probably calling for more reinforcements. Each one fell before they could complete their deadly work. In the valley, Commander Hayes was organizing his team's extraction with the precision of someone who'd done this under fire 100 times before. The wounded went first. Graves, the medic, barely conscious from blood loss, was being winched up in a rescue harness, while Mercer, despite his shattered shoulder, provided covering fire with his offhand. But Elle could see what Hayes couldn't from his position. The militia wasn't retreating. They were regrouping, and they had numbers that would overwhelm even the best training if given time to coordinate. The SEALs needed to move now, or they'd be here when those reinforcements arrived. She keyed her radio to the emergency frequency she'd been monitoring. Her voice came out steady, professional, nothing like the anxious civilian who tried to warn them hours ago. Talon 7, unknown friendly, you have approximately 3 minutes before you're flanked from the northeast. Recommend immediate tactical withdrawal to extraction point. I'll provide cover. There was a pause, then Hayes's voice, tight with pain and confusion. Unknown friendly, identify yourself. Negative, no time. Move your people now, Commander. Another pause, longer this time then. Copy, moving now. Unknown friendly, we're not leaving without you. What's your position? Elle looked at the terrain between her hide and the extraction point. 250 meters of completely exposed slope, with at least a dozen militia fighters between her and the SEALs. With her position compromised, her wound bleeding, and ammunition running low, her odds of making it across that killing ground were maybe 1 in 3. Negative, Talon 7. I'm secure. Get your people out. That's not how this works, Hayes shot back, and there was steel in his voice now. We don't leave anyone behind. I need your position, and I need it now. Before Elle could respond, she saw movement that made her heart stop. 2 figures were fast roping from the Black Hawk, dropping toward the valley floor with the controlled fall of experienced operators. Through her scope, she recognized them. Mercer, his shoulder roughly bandaged but still bleeding, and Hartwell, the red-haired sergeant who'd called her a tree hugger and thrown her map in the dirt. They were coming for her. Both already wounded, both putting themselves in even greater danger, coming to extract someone whose name they didn't even know. Talon 7, negative. Recall your men. Elle's voice cracked slightly, the first break in her professional composure. You have wounded who need immediate medical attention. You cannot risk the entire team for one person. But even as she spoke, she saw the impossible happening. The other SEALs were fast roping down as well. Graves, barely able to stand. Blackwood, the quiet observer. Even Hayes himself, leaving the relative safety of the helicopter to come back for an unknown shooter who'd save their lives. They were living their code, no one left behind, and it was magnificent and insane in equal measure. Elle grabbed the last AK-47 from the militia fighter she'd killed earlier and began laying down covering fire for the 2 SEALs advancing up the slope toward her position. Every 3-round burst sent lightning bolts of pain through muscles exhausted from hours of precise shooting and the burning wound in her side. But she kept firing, kept the militia fighters' heads down, while Mercer and Hartwell bounded up the mountainside. They moved like the elite warriors they were, one covering while the other advanced, communicating with hand signals and trust built from countless training iterations. But they were taking fire from multiple directions, and Hartwell stumbled suddenly, a round catching his already wounded shoulder and spinning him halfway around. He went down hard, and Mercer immediately moved to cover him, returning fire while trying to assess the damage. That's when Elle saw the militia fighter positioning himself behind a boulder outcropping, his rifle already aimed at Mercer's exposed back. The angle was wrong for her current position. She'd have to shoot through the SEAL to hit the threat. No shot. Mercer was about to die, and she couldn't make the shot. The crack of a rifle echoed from the valley, and the militia fighter's head snapped back. He toppled backward, his unfired weapon clattering against rocks. Elle's scope whipped to the source of the shot and found something that stole her breath. Sergeant Knox Hartwell, balanced on his one good leg in the helicopter's door, his rifle still pointed at where the fighter had been. The shot had been perfect, the kind of precision that came from years of training and an absolute refusal to let a teammate die. The man who'd mocked her, dismissed her, treated her like she was worthless, had just saved the life of a Master Chief who was trying to save hers. Mercer reached Elle's position first, his eyes widening as he took in her condition. She was covered in dirt and sweat, her civilian clothes torn, her hands bloody from working the rough metal of the captured rifle. Blood soaked her left side, where the militia round had grazed her ribs. But it was her eyes that caught him, those unmistakable, mismatched eyes he glimpsed on the mountainside. And in those depths, he saw something that confirmed what he'd already suspected. "Ma'am, you're hit bad. We need to move now." Elle looked down at her wound, realizing for the first time how much blood she'd lost. Now that she saw it, her body seemed to remember how to hurt, and the edges of her vision began to gray. "I can walk," she protested, even as her legs started to buckle. Mercer caught her before she fell, his arm going around her waist to support her weight. "Sure you can," he agreed with grim humor. "Just like Hartwell can run marathons right now. Stop being stubborn and let us help you." They started down the slope, Hartwell providing cover despite his wounded shoulder, while Mercer half-carried, half-dragged Elle toward the extraction point. The militia fighters, seeing their quarry escaping, surged forward with renewed fury. Bullets cracked and whined around them, throwing up spurts of dirt and rock fragments. Elle tried to return fire with her pistol, but her hands were shaking too badly from blood loss and exhaustion. The edges of her vision were starting to gray out, her body finally acknowledging the accumulated trauma of the past hours. They were 50 meters from the helicopter when disaster nearly struck. A militia fighter appeared from behind a boulder outcropping, his rifle already aimed at Mercer's exposed back. Elle saw him, tried to raise her weapon, but her wounded body wouldn't respond fast enough. The fighter's finger was tightening on the trigger. Mercer was about to die because of her. The shot came from the helicopter, Hartwell again, proving that his first save hadn't been luck. The fighter's rifle fell from dead fingers, and Hartwell gave a tight nod toward Mercer before scanning for the next threat. They reached the Black Hawk in a chaos of hands pulling them aboard, door gunners maintaining devastating suppressive fire, and the pilot's voice calmly announcing multiple warning lights and fuel concerns, but holding position until everyone was secured. Elle found herself lying on the vibrating metal floor, surrounded by the men she'd saved. Her vision was fading in and out, blood loss finally overwhelming her system. She could hear their voices, someone calling for the medic, someone else setting up an IV line with practiced efficiency, the steady professional calm of warriors who'd seen teammates wounded before and knew exactly what to do. "Stay with us," Hayes commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed, even by death itself. "You don't get to save our lives and then die on us. That's not how this works." Elle wanted to tell him that was exactly how it often worked, that the price of saving others was sometimes your own life, that her husband had proven that 3 years ago in a Syrian desert. But the words wouldn't come. Her vision was narrowing to a tunnel, darkness creeping in from the edges like a living thing. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness claimed her was Mercer holding something up, something that had fallen from her pack during the fight. Even through her fading vision, she could see his eyes widening in sudden recognition, his mouth opening in shock. A photograph. Her and Garrett at their wedding, both in marine dress blues. And between them, hand raised in blessing, Colonel Frank Whitmore in his full dress uniform. The three of them connected by bonds deeper than blood. Mercer's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Ghost Hawk! Sweet Jesus, she's Ghost Hawk! Garrett Ashford's wife!" Then darkness took her, and Elle Ashford fell into dreams of Syria and explosions, and a husband's voice saying, "Keep fighting, babe," as the world burned around them. She came back to consciousness slowly, swimming up through thick black water toward a distant light. Sounds came first, the steady, rhythmic beep of medical monitors, distant murmur of professional voices, soft whoosh of a ventilator that, thank God, wasn't connected to her. Then smells, that distinctive combination of antiseptic, floor wax, and industrial laundry that could only mean a military hospital. Finally came the pain, a deep, burning ache in her side that spoke of surgery and significant trauma, the kind of pain that meant doctors had been inside her body, cutting and stitching and putting her back together. Opening her eyes took enormous effort, but when she managed it, she found herself in a private room flooded with afternoon sunlight. The view through the window showed the Boise Valley spread out below, which meant she was at the VA Medical Center, probably in one of the secure wings reserved for patients whose very presence was classified. She wasn't alone. The entire SEAL team was there, scattered around the room in various states of injury. Mercer in a wheelchair, his shoulder immobilized in a complex brace. Hartwell on crutches, his leg wrapped in bandages that spoke of significant damage. Graves on a rolling IV stand, his face pale but his eyes alert. Blackwood and the others bearing smaller wounds but all very much alive. And standing by the window, backlit by the sun like some figure from her past, was Colonel Frank Whitmore. His presence here meant her cover was completely blown. Frank had been her handler, her only connection to the world she'd left behind. The one person who'd known Ghost Hawk was alive. For him to be here, standing openly in a room full of Navy SEALs, meant that particular secret no longer existed. "Welcome back, Captain Ashford," Frank said simply, his voice carrying a weight of knowledge that made her stomach drop. The words hung in the air like a confession, like an ending. "You gave us quite a scare." Elle's throat was raw from the intubation tube that had clearly been removed recently. Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "How long?" 2 days. You needed surgery to repair damage from that graze. Turned out to be more serious than it looked. Lost a lot of blood. Frank moved away from the window, and Elle could see the concern in his weathered face despite his controlled expression. These gentlemen have been very patient, waiting for you to wake up so they could get some answers. Answers? Elle's laugh came out more like a cough. About what? How a wildlife researcher ended up with a custom sniper rifle and military-grade communications equipment? About how Ghost Hawk ended up hiding in Idaho when the entire Marine Corps thinks she's dead, Mercer said quietly. He was holding something in his good hand. The photograph, Elle realized, the one that had fallen from her pack. I recognized the location, Firebase Kandahar. This was taken there, wasn't it? 2 weeks before Operation Desert Viper. The operation name sent ice through Elle's veins. Desert Viper was so classified that acknowledging its existence was a federal crime. The fact that Mercer knew about it meant he had clearances most people couldn't imagine. I was part of the quick reaction force that responded when everything went wrong, Mercer continued, his voice soft with memory. I saw the after-action photos. Read the classified reports. Captain Elara Ashford, call sign Ghost Hawk, was listed as MIA, presumed KIA. But everyone knew what MIA meant in those mountains. It meant nobody was recovered. Frank moved closer to the bed, and Elle could see the mixture of pride and concern in his eyes. I made some calls, pulled some files that aren't supposed to exist, checked some timelines that raised interesting questions. He pulled a thin folder from inside his jacket. Wildlife researcher shows up in exact area where Ghost Hawk disappeared. Same height, same build, same unusual eyes. Teaching wilderness survival to local kids, just like Elara Ashford used to do during Hearts and Minds operations. Either it was the world's biggest coincidence, or Ghost Hawk had been hiding in plain sight for 3 years. Elle closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her exposed identity settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. Everything she'd worked to build, the anonymity that had allowed her to operate freely, the cover that had kept her safe, was gone. Burned away in the span of a few hours because she couldn't let 6 men die. How many people know? She asked, not opening her eyes. Officially? Frank's voice was carefully neutral. Nobody. This conversation isn't happening. You're not here. Ghost Hawk is still listed as MIA, presumed KIA, in the Marine Corps database. Unofficially? The people in this room, maybe 3 others with security clearances that technically don't exist. Frank paused, and Elle could hear the weight of what came next. Your secret is safe if you want it to be. But Elle, these men deserve to know why you saved them. Why you risked everything for people who treated you like you were worthless. Elle opened her eyes and looked at the SEALs. These men who had risked their lives to save her after she'd saved them. Hayes with his expression of awe and shame. Hartwell, who couldn't meet her eyes, staring at his hands folded in his lap. Blackwood, who looked like he might be sick. Graves, who kept opening his mouth as if to speak, then closing it again, unable to find words. It was Mercer who finally broke the suffocating silence, his voice barely above a whisper. The deadliest American sniper in history, more Silver Stars and Bronze Stars than most entire units earned collectively. The only woman to ever complete Delta IV sniper school. He paused, taking a shaky breath. Multiple black operations that are so classified they don't officially exist. And we called you a tree hugger. We threw you out of our operation like you were some hysterical civilian. We mocked you when you tried to save our lives. You didn't know, Elle said simply, her voice carrying no anger, only exhaustion. That was the point. Ghost Hawk works because people think she's dead. That's not an excuse, Hayes interjected, his command voice firm despite the emotion underneath. We didn't listen because of what you looked like. Because you're a woman. Because you didn't fit our mental image of someone worth listening to. He paused, struggling with words. Our arrogance, our prejudice, our complete failure as leaders almost got us killed. And you saved us anyway. Hartwell finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed with more than just pain from his wounds. After what I said to you, the way I treated you, calling you a tree hugger, dismissing everything you tried to tell us, his voice broke. Why? Why didn't you just let us die? We would have deserved it. Elle was quiet for a long moment, gathering strength to tell a story she'd never told anyone except Frank. A story that had shaped everything she'd become in the 3 years since Syria. The room waited in absolute silence, even the medical equipment seeming to pause in anticipation. My husband, Gunnery Sergeant Garrett Ashford, was my spotter for 6 years, she began, her voice steady despite the pain of the memories. We met in Scout Sniper School at Camp Pendleton in 2010. He was this impossibly talented kid from Montana who could read wind patterns like other people read books, could calculate ballistic adjustments in his head faster than most people could do it with computers. She paused, a sad smile touching her lips. We were competitive at first. I was trying to prove that a woman could be just as good as any man in the Scout Sniper community. He was trying to prove that a ranch kid from nowhere could compete with anyone. We pushed each other, challenged each other, made each other better. And somewhere along the way, we fell in love. Frank officiated our wedding, Elle continued, nodding toward Whitmore. Gave Garrett a rifle as a wedding gift, told him, "You watch her six, she watches yours." We were more than just a sniper team after that. We were perfect partners. We could communicate without words. He knew what I was thinking before I thought it. I knew what he needed before he asked. Together, we never failed a mission. They called us the Ghost Team because we could appear anywhere, eliminate any target, and disappear without a trace. Her voice grew quieter, more strained. The day he died was our 5th wedding anniversary. We'd been in position for 43 hours, waiting for a high-value target to appear. I was tired, hungry, and I wanted to get back to base because Garrett had somehow managed to arrange for a cake to be delivered to our forward operating base. A real cake with actual frosting in the middle of a Syrian desert. Tears were running down her face now, but she didn't seem to notice. When the target finally appeared, I rushed the shot. Just by half a second, maybe less. The bullet hit his body armor instead of finding the gap I was aiming for. He survived. His security detail traced the shot back to our position, and suddenly we had 60-plus fighters converging on our hide. Garrett held them off for 9 hours while I escaped. Elle's voice was barely audible now. 9 hours of fighting alone so I could live. When his ammunition ran low, he called in a danger-close airstrike on his own position rather than be captured. His last words to me over the radio were, "Tell Rowan I love her. Keep my watch. Keep fighting, babe." The room was absolutely silent. Even the tough Navy SEALs had tears in their eyes. "So that's what I've been doing for 3 years, Elle continued, her voice strengthening. Fighting, watching, protecting, making sure American soldiers come home, even the ones who would dismiss me as worthless. Because that's what Garrett would have done. Because every life I save is his legacy continuing. Because if I stop, if I let even one American die when I could have prevented it, then his sacrifice means nothing." Frank spoke into the heavy silence that followed. "How many operations have you influenced from the shadows, Elle?" She looked at him steadily. 43 confirmed interventions over 3 years. Anonymous tips to patrols that prevented ambushes. Intelligence reports from sources that didn't exist, that saved convoys. 7 times I had to take direct action with kinetic engagement. She paused. This was the first time I couldn't maintain my cover. 43. Hayes breathed the number like a prayer. "You've been running solo Guardian Angel operations for 3 years with no support, no backup, no recognition." "Recognition gets people killed," Elle replied flatly. "Every militia fighter who finds out Ghost Hawk is alive will come hunting. Not just for me, but for anyone who might have helped me. The villagers who sold supplies to a wildlife researcher. The kids I taught wilderness survival. The shepherds who shared their coffee with a lonely woman in the mountains. They'd all become targets." Frank moved closer to her bed, his expression serious. "Which brings us to the current situation. The militia is already spreading word that Ghost Hawk is alive. They found the bodies on the ridge, analyzed the shot patterns, recognized the precision of your work. And Elle, one of them survived long enough to tell his comrades something very specific." Elle's hand moved instinctively to her shoulder, where her shirt had been torn during the fight. There was a tattoo there. Ghost Hawk above a stylized rifle scope crosshair, with 317 confirmed below it, and underneath in smaller text, "For Garrett, until Valhalla." It was the same tattoo Garrett had designed for both of them, though his had read, Ghost Team Spotter, watching her six, until Valhalla. She'd gotten hers after his death, a permanent memorial carved into her skin. So I disappear again, Elle said simply. Deeper this time. Maybe Canada, maybe somewhere else entirely. Ilara Ashford, the wildlife researcher, ceases to exist. I become someone new. Or, Frank said carefully, you come back officially. We bring Ghost Hawk back from the dead, give you the support you should have had all along. Full operational status, resources, backup when you need it. Elle shook her head immediately. That would make me a target and compromise every operation. The moment you make her official, she becomes trackable, predictable, killable. Then we do something else, Hayes interjected, surprising everyone. We keep you dead officially, but we make sure you have everything you need. Black budget funding, equipment drops, intelligence support. You keep being the ghost, but now you're our ghost. You provide overwatch for operations we don't even know we need. Intelligence from sources we can't access. And in return, we make sure you have everything required to keep operating. Frank considered this, stroking his chin thoughtfully. It's unconventional, but it could work. You'd maintain your cover identity, but with full support from people who actually know who you are. No official connection, no paper trail, just operational necessity and warriors taking care of their own. And them? Elle asked, gesturing to the SEALs. They can't go around knowing Ghost Hawk is alive. That kind of information has a way of spreading, no matter how careful people are. We can keep a secret, ma'am, Hartwell said firmly, finally finding his voice. We owe you that much. Hell, we owe you everything. It's not about owing, Elle replied. It's about operational security. The more people who know, the more dangerous it becomes for everyone involved. Mercer leaned forward in his wheelchair, his expression intense. Ma'am, with all due respect, you've been doing this alone for 3 years. You've been carrying this burden by yourself with no one to watch your six, no one to share the load. Maybe it's time to trust someone else. Maybe it's time to let us help you the way you helped us. Elle looked at each of them in turn. These men who had gone from dismissing her to risking their lives for her in the span of a single morning. The isolation of the past 3 years suddenly felt crushing. The weight of carrying Garrett's legacy alone, almost unbearable. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was time to trust again. There would have to be rules, she said finally. No official contact unless it's operational necessity. No records, no attempting to find me. No wives, no teammates, no commanders. Ghost Hawk stays dead to everyone except the people in this room. Agreed, Hayes said immediately. And if I send you intelligence, you act on it. No dismissing it because it comes from unconventional sources. Never again, Hayes promised, and the shame in his voice made it clear he meant it. And you never speak of this to anyone, not your families, not your friends, not anyone who doesn't already know. Ghost Hawk stays dead in all official records. Understood, they replied in unison. Frank pulled out a secure satellite phone, one of the types that officially didn't exist. Then let's make this official in the most unofficial way possible. Ghost Hawk remains KIA in all records. Ilara Ashford, the wildlife researcher, continues her work in the mountains. But if American forces need a guardian angel watching over them, she happens to be available. There's one more thing, Frank said, his voice taking on a different tone. Elle, there's been some unusual activity that you need to know about. Reports of precision sniper work in areas where you weren't operating. Elle's attention sharpened. What kind of reports? Montana, 3 weeks ago. Militia commander taken out with a single shot at 2,200 meters through a blizzard. Wyoming, 10 days ago. Similar MO, similar precision. And Arizona just 2 days before you engage the militia here. Frank paused. All the hits bear your signature techniques, your exact style of shooting, but you weren't anywhere near those locations. That's impossible, Elle said, but even as she spoke, ice was forming in her stomach. I've been in Idaho for 3 years. I haven't traveled more than 50 miles from my cabin. I know, Frank said quietly, which means either someone is copying your techniques with remarkable accuracy, or there's another ghost out there. Someone who shoots like you, moves like you. Uses your exact operational patterns. Mercer's expression was troubled. Ma'am, could someone have been trained using your techniques? Maybe someone who studied your after-action reports? My after-action reports are classified at levels most generals don't have access to, Elle said, and there is no combat footage of Ghost Hawk operations. That was the whole point. We were ghosts. We didn't leave evidence. Then who? Hayes asked. Elle's hand moved to Garrett's pocket watch, pressing it against her chest as her mind raced through possibilities. Who would have access to her techniques? Who could replicate her style so perfectly that even military analysts couldn't tell the difference? Only one person had ever known her methods that intimately. Only one person had watched her work for 6 years, had spotted for every successful mission, had understood her thought process so completely that he could predict her shots before she took them. But Garrett was dead. She'd heard him die over the radio. She'd seen the crater where his position had been, a hole in the earth deep enough to bury a building. Except Frank's words from earlier suddenly took on new weight. No body had been recovered. Frank, Elle said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. When you said you pulled files that aren't supposed to exist, what exactly did you find? Whitmore's expression became carefully neutral, the look of a man who'd spent 50 years keeping secrets and knew how to parse information. I found inconsistencies in the after-action reports from Operation Desert Viper, gaps in the timeline, communications that should have existed but don't appear in any database. He paused. And I found a classified addendum to Garrett's KIA determination that was sealed under a compartmented program I wasn't cleared for until last week. What did it say? Elle's heart was hammering now, hope and fear warring in her chest. It said that the body recovery team found no remains in the airstrike crater, no DNA evidence, no equipment fragments that could be definitively matched to Gunnery Sergeant Garrett Ashford. Frank pulled out another file, this one so heavily redacted that entire pages were black ink. It said that the determination of KIA was made based on the assumption that no one could have survived that airstrike. But it was an assumption, not a confirmation. The room seemed to tilt. Elle gripped the bed rails with white-knuckled hands, her mind struggling to process what Frank was saying. You're telling me there's a chance my husband survived? That he's been alive for 3 years and never contacted me? I'm saying there's a possibility, Frank said carefully. A small one. And if Garrett did survive, if he was extracted somehow, there would only be one reason for him to stay dark for 3 years. Deep cover, Mercer said quietly. Black operation so classified that even his wife couldn't know he was alive. Elle's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place with terrible clarity. The precision shooting that matched her style, the operational patterns that mirrored her own. The timing, it had started 6 months ago. Rowan, Elle whispered, her voice breaking. Our daughter. I was told she was stillborn. They showed me medical documents, a death certificate. But if Garrett survived, if he knew she was alive, she looked at Frank with desperate hope. Could they have lied to me? Could Rowan be alive? Frank's expression was pained. Elle, I don't know. But if Garrett did survive, if he had reason to believe Rowan was alive, he would have moved heaven and earth to protect her. And if he trained her using your techniques, she'd shoot exactly like me, Elle finished. She'd be 17 now. The perfect age for the kind of precision work we've been seeing. My God, Frank, my daughter and my husband might both be alive. And they've been out there for 6 months trying to... Elle's voice broke completely. Trying to find me? Trying to protect American forces like we did? We don't know for certain, Frank cautioned. This is speculation based on circumstantial evidence. But Elle, the timing, the techniques, the targeting patterns, it all fits. Hayes leaned forward. Captain Ashford, if your husband and daughter are alive, if they're operating somewhere out there, we need to find them. Bring them in. Make sure they're safe. But even as he spoke, Frank's satellite phone buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at the screen, and his expression went from concerned to grim. We may have a bigger problem. I just got word that one of your team is missing, Commander. Hayes's head snapped up. Who? Sergeant Hartwell. He was released from medical care yesterday, supposed to report back to his unit this morning. Never showed up. Security footage shows him leaving the hospital, getting into a vehicle with two unidentified individuals, and disappearing. Elle felt ice water pour down her spine. That's not a coincidence. Someone's drawing us out. Frank nodded grimly. There's more. Hartwell's last communication before he vanished was a text message. It was sent to a number that doesn't officially exist, the emergency contact number I gave you 3 years ago. He turned the phone so Elle could see the screen. The message was brief, just 7 words, but they hit like a physical blow. Ghost Hawk, they have your husband. Come alone. R. Rowan, or someone who wanted Elle to think it was Rowan. It's a trap, Hayes said immediately. Classic bait and switch. They take one of our people, use your daughter's initial to make you think it's legitimate, and wait for you to walk into an ambush. Obviously, it's a trap, Elle agreed. But even as she spoke, she was pulling out her IV lines with practiced efficiency, ignoring the protests from the medical monitors. Which is why I'm going alone. Like hell you are, Mercer said, struggling to get out of his wheelchair despite his shattered shoulder. Ma'am, with all due respect, you're wounded, Master Chief. All of you are. You can't back me up in your condition, and I won't have more American lives at risk because someone is using my family as bait. Elle swung her legs off the bed, gritting her teeth against the pain in her side. This is what I do. I operate alone. I've been doing it for 3 years. Frank moved to block her path, and for a moment they stood facing each other, the old warrior and the young one, mentor and student, the man who'd taught her everything, and the woman who'd surpassed even his considerable skills. Ellie, he said quietly, using the nickname only he was allowed. You're in no condition for a mission. You just had surgery. You've lost blood. You need recovery time. I need my daughter, Frank, and if there's even a chance that Garrett's alive. She couldn't finish the sentence. Frank studied her for a long moment, then sighed and stepped aside. You're as stubborn as your father was, and Garrett. He pulled a set of keys from his pocket. Your gear is in my truck. I retrieved it from your cabin before anyone else could find it. Both rifles, ammunition, tactical equipment, everything. Elle took the keys, but Frank didn't let go immediately. You're not going completely alone, though. I'll be in overwatch position, monitoring communications, and these SEALs will be 15 minutes out, ready to move if you need backup. I said alone, and I said you're not going completely alone, Frank interrupted, his command voice brooking no argument. You want to walk into a trap, fine, but you're doing it with support, even if that support stays out of sight. That's non-negotiable, Captain. Elle looked at him, saw the concern and love in his weathered face, and nodded. 15 minutes out, not closer. If they detect backup, they'll kill Hartwell and disappear. Agreed, Hayes said. But Captain, you need to at least take communication gear. We need to know what's happening. I'll take a tracker, Elle conceded. Passive only, no comms unless I initiate. And Frank? She looked at her old mentor. If this goes bad, if I don't make it back, make sure the world knows what Garrett did. Make sure Rowan knows her father was a hero, even if I never got to tell her myself. You'll tell her yourself, Frank said firmly. You're the best operator I ever trained, Elle. You're coming back with your family. As Elle dressed in her tactical gear, her hands moving with the automatic precision of thousands of repetitions, one thought burned through her mind with crystal clarity. 3 years ago, she'd lost everything. Her husband, her daughter, her identity, her purpose. She'd become a ghost, existing only to protect others, hollow except for the mission. Now, impossibly, she might get some of it back. But first she had to walk into a trap set by people who'd been hunting Ghost Hawk for years. People who knew her techniques, her patterns, her weaknesses. People who'd been smart enough to use the only bait in the world that could draw her out of hiding. Her family. She checked Garrett's rifle one final time. Vigilance, the weapon that had never let her down, and headed for the door. Behind her, 6 Navy SEALs and 1 retired Marine colonel watched her go, each one silently praying that the ghost who'd saved their lives would survive the trap waiting in the Arizona desert. The Arizona desert burned under a sun that felt like the edge of a blade, heat shimmering off the rocks in waves that made the distant mountains dance like mirages. Elle had been in position for 40 minutes, her body pressed flat against sun-baked stone that radiated warmth even through her tactical clothing. Through her spotting scope, she surveyed the compound hidden in a canyon that satellites couldn't properly survey. The cloud cover that perpetually obscured this location was too consistent, too perfectly positioned to be natural. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to keep this place off the grid. The coordinates from Rowan's message had led her here, to a facility that sprawled across the canyon floor like a concrete cancer. 3 main buildings, multiple outbuildings, security perimeter that spoke of professional military planning. Guard rotations were precise. Overlapping fields of fire covered every approach, and the whole setup screamed black site operation. Government or private military contractor, Elle couldn't tell from this distance. But whoever ran this place had resources and training that went far beyond standard militia capabilities. What made her blood run cold wasn't the security, it was what she'd found when she arrived at her overwatch position. Someone had left a rifle there. Her rifle. Not vigilance, which she carried, but reckoning. Her personal custom Remington 700 that should have been locked in her cabin's hidden armory in Idaho, 3 states away. The weapon was positioned perfectly, already zeroed for the primary building, with a clear line of sight to a window on the 3rd floor. Next to it lay a note written in handwriting that made her heart stutter. Mom, I've been watching you for 6 months. Dad taught me everything. He's inside, 3rd building, 4th window from left. You have 10 minutes before they move him. I'll cover you, Rowan. Elle's hands trembled as she picked up Reckoning, checking it with automatic thoroughness. It was definitely her rifle, every scratch, every modification, exactly as she remembered. The scope had already been adjusted for range and wind, pre-calculated by someone who understood ballistics as well as she did. Through the scope, she found the indicated window, and her breath caught. There, partially visible through reinforced glass, was a figure that moved like Garrett, stood like Garrett, turned his head with that particular tilt that had always meant he was thinking through a problem. 3 years older, with a beard she'd never seen on him, thinner than she remembered, but unmistakably, impossibly, her husband. Her radio crackled with a young female voice, nervous and urgent. Mom, can you hear me? I know this looks like a trap, but I swear it's real. Dad's in there. They've had him for 3 years, using him to try to find you. I only escaped 6 months ago. I've been searching for you ever since. Elle's finger found the transmit button, her voice barely steady. Rowan? Is it really you? It's me, Mom. I know you don't remember my voice. I was just born when… The voice broke. When Dad was deployed to Syria. But he didn't die. They extracted him somehow, held him in black sites. They told him I was dead unless he cooperated. He's been giving them low-level intel for 3 years, believing he was protecting a daughter who they said was stillborn, but was really in their program. Where are you? Elle scanned the surrounding terrain, looking for the source of the transmission. Southeast Ridge, about 400 meters from your position. I can see you, Mom. I can see Dad. And I can see Sergeant Hartwell in the eastern building. We have maybe 8 minutes before they realize something's wrong and execute both of them. Elle's tactical mind warred with her mother's heart. Every instinct screamed, trap. This was too convenient, too perfectly designed to exploit her emotions. But that figure in the window moved exactly like Garrett. And if there was even a chance… Frank's voice crackled in her earpiece, the passive tracker she'd agreed to carry allowing one-way communication. Elle, I've got eyes on the compound through satellite feed. I'm reading at least 20 armed personnel, military-grade equipment. This is way bigger than a simple militia operation. And Elle, I'm also reading a heat signature on that southeast ridge. Young female, approximately 17 years old based on size and thermal profile. Can you confirm it's Rowan? Negative, but whoever it is matches the age and build. And she's in an elevated shooting position with what looks like a long rifle. Frank paused. Elle, this could still be bait. That thermal signature could be anyone. Before Elle could respond, movement in the compound caught her attention. Through the scope, she saw Hartwell being dragged from one building toward another, his hands zip-tied, blood on his face from a fresh beating. 2 guards flanked him, weapons ready, and they were moving with purpose toward what looked like a vehicle staging area. They were about to transport him. If he left this compound, finding him again would be nearly impossible. "I'm going in," Elle said into her radio. "Elle, wait for backup," Frank urged. "Hayes and his team are 12 minutes out." Hartwell doesn't have 12 minutes. Elle was already moving, transitioning from observation to approach, her body flowing over the rocks with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent 3 years becoming invisible in wilderness terrain. And if that's really Rowan on that ridge, she needs to see that her mother doesn't abandon people. She heard Frank's resigned sigh, going silent. "But Elle, the tracker stays active. If you don't check in every 3 minutes, I'm sending everyone." "Copy." The approach took 2 minutes of careful movement through terrain that offered minimal cover. Elle used every rock, every shadow, every slight depression in the ground to mask her advance. Whoever was watching from that southeast ridge, Rowan or someone pretending to be Rowan, was providing overwatch. Twice, guards who would have spotted Elle's movement suddenly collapsed, taken down by precision shots that came from exactly where the young female voice had said she'd be positioned. The shooting was perfect, professional, and unnervingly familiar, each shot placed exactly where Elle would have placed it, using the same target priority Elle would have chosen. Either it really was her daughter, trained by Garrett using Elle's techniques, or someone had studied Ghost Hawk's methods with obsessive detail. Elle reached the eastern building where Hartwell had been held, slipping through a service entrance that should have been locked, but stood slightly ajar. Another sign this was orchestrated, someone had prepared her path. The interior was concrete and fluorescent lighting, the institutional ugliness of a facility designed for function over comfort. Elle moved through corridors with her pistol up, each corner cleared with textbook precision. The building seemed abandoned, which was wrong. Where were the guards? Where was the security she'd seen through the scope? She found Hartwell in a ground floor room, slumped against the wall, zip ties cut but too injured to move quickly. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Captain, it's a trap. She's not—" Gunshot. Hartwell jerked as a round hit the wall 6 inches from his head, showering him with concrete fragments. Elle spun toward the door to find a young woman standing there, rifle aimed, face partially obscured by tactical gear. But the eyes were visible. Mismatched eyes, one blue, one gray. Heterochromia, exactly like Elle's own. "Mom," the young woman said, and her voice was the same one from the radio. "I'm sorry, I didn't want to do this, but they said if I brought you in, they'd let Dad go. They said we could be a family again." The woman pulled back her face covering, revealing features that were heartbreakingly familiar. Elle's own face at 17, unmarked by loss and war, with Garrett's strong jawline and straight nose. A daughter she'd been told had died before taking her first breath, now standing before her with a rifle and tears streaming down her cheeks. "Rowan?" Elle's voice broke on the name. "They took me when I was born, told you I was stillborn, raised me in their program." Rowan's hands were shaking, the rifle wavering. "They told Dad I was alive after Syria, used me as leverage to make him cooperate. I've been training my whole life. They called me Subject 7, made me into what you are, what Dad is, a ghost." Elle's world tilted. "You were leverage? They told Garrett you were alive to make him cooperate?" Rowan nodded, tears streaming. "He thought calling that airstrike meant saving me. 3 years of torture, 3 years of giving them intel, all because he thought his cooperation kept me alive. Mom, he sacrificed everything, his freedom, his honor, 3 years of his life, for a daughter he'd never even met. Because that's who he is." The weight of it crushed Elle. Garrett hadn't just survived Syria. He'd endured 3 years of hell believing he was protecting their child. The husband who'd called fire on himself to save her had spent 3 more years in captivity to save the daughter he thought was alive. "Who are they?" Elle asked, her mind racing through tactical options, while her heart broke at seeing her daughter for the first time. "Private military contractors, started as CIA black operations, went rogue 5 years ago. They've been building an army of enhanced operators, recruiting and creating people like us." Rowan's finger moved toward the trigger. "I'm sorry, Mom. I know what you think of me. But Dad's alive. He's here. And if I bring you in, they'll let both of us go. We can be a family. Isn't that worth it? Elle saw it then, the slight tension in Rowan's shoulders that meant she was about to fire. The daughter she'd never known was about to shoot her to save the husband who'd supposedly died 3 years ago. The mathematics of love and sacrifice playing out in a concrete room in the Arizona desert. But Elle also saw something else. The way Rowan's eyes flicked to a point above and behind Elle's position. The almost imperceptible nod toward the ceiling vent. And Elle understood. Rowan was giving her a way out while appearing to corner her. The daughter she'd never met was trying to save her while pretending to betray her. Elle moved, dropping and rolling left as Rowan fired. The bullet went exactly where Elle had been standing, close enough to be convincing, but carefully aimed to miss. Elle came up near the vent Rowan had indicated, grabbed Hartwell with one arm, and pulled him toward the opening. "Stay down and cover your ears," Elle hissed to the wounded SEAL. She yanked the vent cover free and tossed a flashbang grenade, one of 3 she'd brought, back toward the doorway. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space, but it bought them seconds. Elle shoved Hartwell toward the vent shaft, which was larger than standard, another sign this had been prepared. As they moved, Elle heard Rowan's voice, loud enough to be picked up by whatever surveillance was monitoring this room. "Subject 7 to control. Target is escaping through the east ventilation system. Initiating pursuit." Then, much quieter, barely audible. "Go left at the first junction, then straight for 30 meters. Dad's in the room at the end. I'll hold them as long as I can. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry for everything." Elle and Hartwell crawled through the ventilation shaft, the wounded SEAL gritting his teeth against pain, but moving with the determination of someone who understood that stopping meant death. Behind them, Elle could hear controlled gunfire. Rowan engaging someone, but the shots were deliberately high, deliberately wasteful of ammunition, buying them time. They emerged in a corridor that led to the central building. Through a reinforced window, Elle could finally see clearly into the room where Garrett was being held. And her heart stopped. It was Garrett, 3 years older, scarred, exhausted, but unmistakably her husband. He was chained to a wall, but his eyes were alert, tracking movement outside his cell, with the awareness of someone who'd never stopped being an operator, despite 3 years of captivity. But something was wrong. The way the chains were arranged, the position of the guards outside, the entire setup looked less like a prisoner containment and more like bait, Colonel Frank Whitmore's voice said, and Elle whirled to find her mentor stepping from a side corridor, rifle lowered but ready. Behind him were Hayes and Mercer, both armed, both supposedly 15 minutes away. "Frank, what are you doing here?" "Same thing I've been doing for 3 years, Ellie, protecting you." Frank's expression was grim. "Even when it means protecting you from yourself. That girl in there, she is your daughter, but she's also something else, something they made her into." "I know what she is," Elle said. She's trying to help herself survive," Frank interrupted gently. "Elle, we intercepted communications from this facility. Subject 7 escaped 6 months ago, yes, but she's been recaptured twice. Each time they gave her one more chance to prove her loyalty. This is her final test. Bring in Ghost Hawk, or they terminate her and Garrett both." The words hit like physical blows. "So she's being forced to choose between her survival and yours," Frank said. "And she chose to give you a fighting chance. Those directions," she whispered, "that gunfire buying you time, she's betraying them even knowing it means her death. That's your daughter, Elle. That's Garrett's daughter. And we're not leaving either of them here." Elle looked at the window showing Garrett, at her husband of 6 years, who she'd mourned for 3. "Then what do we do?" "We get them both out," Hayes said. "Captain, we've got a full SEAL platoon 2 minutes out. Air support 5 minutes out. Rowan just gave us the element of surprise. We use it." But even as he spoke, Elle saw movement on the monitors mounted in the corridor. Rowan, surrounded by armed personnel, being escorted, not dragged, escorted, toward Garrett's holding room. And on her face was an expression that Elle recognized from her own mirror. Determination. Purpose. The look of someone about to sacrifice everything for a mission. "She's going for Garrett," Elle breathed. "She's going to try to break him out herself, knowing they'll kill her for it. Or she's following orders to move him before we can extract, Frank said. Either way, we're out of time. Elle watched through the monitors as Rowan entered Garrett's cell, saw her daughter, and she was Elle's daughter, no matter what anyone said, approach the husband Elle had mourned. Watched Rowan pull out a knife and move toward Garrett's chains, and saw Garrett's face transform from suspicion to shock to something that looked like recognition and love as Rowan spoke words the monitors couldn't capture. Whatever Rowan was saying, Garrett believed her, trusted her, and when she cut his chains, he stood on unsteady legs and followed her toward the door. They're making a run for it, Mercer observed, both of them, together. The facility erupted in alarm klaxons. Red lights flashed. Automated security doors began slamming shut throughout the compound. And on the monitors, Elle could see armed response teams converging on Garrett and Rowan's position from 3 directions. They had maybe 90 seconds before being overwhelmed. Frank, I need you to trust me, Elle said, already moving. Hayes, Mercer, cover the western approach. Hartwell, despite his wounds, you're on communication. Coordinate with that inbound platoon and tell them to hit the north perimeter in exactly 4 minutes. Elle, what are you doing? Frank demanded. What I should have done 3 years ago. Elle checked vigilance one final time, the rifle that had never failed her, that carried Garrett's initials in his careful adjustments. I'm bringing my family home. She moved through the facility like smoke, like memory, like the ghost she'd become. Every corner was pre-cleared in her mind from the approach reconnaissance. Every guard position was calculated. Every second was accounted for in a mental countdown that had been running since the moment she'd entered this compound. She reached Garrett and Rowan's position 30 seconds before the response teams did. Her husband looked up as she appeared, and the expression on his face made 3 years of grief worth surviving. Elle, just her name, spoken like a prayer, like a promise, like the first word of a conversation they'd been having for 6 years and had never really stopped. Later, Elle said, though her heart was screaming to hold him, to verify he was real and solid and alive. Right now, run. They ran. Garrett on unsteady legs that remembered how to move despite 3 years of captivity. Rowan with the fluid grace of someone trained from birth for exactly this kind of operation. And Elle, the ghost who'd saved 6 Navy SEALs and was now saving the only 2 people in the world who mattered more than the mission. The facility erupted around them, Frank's covering fire from his position, Hayes and Mercer engaging response teams with the precision of elite operators who'd learned their lesson about underestimating intelligence from unexpected sources. And somewhere in the chaos, Hartwell on the radio, coordinating the inbound platoon with timing that would have made a symphony conductor proud. They burst from the compound into the desert heat, into air that tasted like freedom and cordite and possibility. Black Hawks appeared over the ridgeline exactly on schedule, door gunners laying down suppressive fire that turned the compound's defensive positions into scrap metal and broken stone. Elle, Garrett, and Rowan ran toward the extraction point, a clearing 200 meters from the facility where the lead helicopter was already touching down. Behind them, the compound was being systematically destroyed by precision strikes. Not to kill everyone inside, but to eliminate the infrastructure, the records, the evidence of what had happened here. They reached the helicopter, hands pulled them aboard. The aircraft lifted off, banking hard to avoid ground fire that was already diminishing as the facility's defenders realized they were outgunned and outmaneuvered. And finally, 3 years after a Syrian airstrike had torn their world apart, Elle and Garrett held each other while their daughter, the child they'd never gotten to raise, watched with tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, Rowan kept saying. I'm so sorry. They raised me to be a weapon, told me my parents were dead, trained me to kill. When I found out you were alive, when I learned the truth, I didn't know I didn't know if you'd even want me. Elle reached out with one arm, still holding Garrett with the other, and pulled Rowan into an embrace that had been 17 years in the making. You're our daughter. Nothing they did to you, nothing they made you into, changes that. You're ours, and we're bringing you home. The flight back to Boise was surreal. A family reunion at 12,000 feet, surrounded by Navy SEALs and the rhythmic thud of helicopter rotors. Garrett explained, his voice rough from disuse, how the airstrike had been called on an empty position while he'd been extracted by contractors who'd been tracking Ghost Team for months. How they'd held him in black sites, torturing him for information about Elle. How they'd told him Rowan was alive and would be killed unless he cooperated. I gave them nothing important, Garrett said, his hand clutching Elle's like he was afraid she'd disappear if he let go. Low-level intel, stuff they could have gotten elsewhere. Enough to keep them convinced I was cooperating. But Elle, I never told them where you were. Never gave them anything that could help them find Ghost Hawk. I know, Elle said, because if you had, they would have found me years ago. Rowan explained her side. Raised in a facility that trained child operatives, told her parents had been killed in action, molded into the perfect sniper using techniques stolen from Ghost Hawk's classified files. They showed me videos of you, Rowan said to Elle, combat footage they'd somehow obtained, made me study your every move, your every shot, said if I could shoot like you, I'd be perfect. I didn't know I was learning from my own mother. When did you find out? Elle asked. 6 months ago. I overheard 2 handlers talking about the Ashford situation, about how they had the husband and the daughter, and if they could just capture the wife, they'd have the complete Ghost Team genetic line. Rowan's mismatched eyes, so like Elle's own, were haunted. I confronted one of them, beat the truth out of him, and then I escaped and started trying to find you. The precision shooting incidents, Frank said, putting pieces together. Montana, Wyoming, Arizona. That was you, operating independently, trying to draw Elle out? Rowan nodded. I used her techniques because they were all I knew. Targeted militia operations because I thought that's what Ghost Hawk would do. Left my signature sloppy enough that anyone tracking her would notice. I was trying to send a message. Trying to say, I'm here. I'm like you. Find me. And when that didn't work, you let yourself get recaptured, Elle said, understanding dawning. You went back to them voluntarily. I traded myself for information about Dad, and then I used their resources to set up this extraction. Made them think I was bringing you in when really, Rowan's voice broke, I just wanted my family back. I wanted to know what it felt like to have a mother and father who chose me instead of a program that created me. Elle pulled her daughter closer. You have that now. Whatever comes next, we face it together. The hospital recovery took a week. Garrett needed medical treatment for malnutrition and the lingering effects of 3 years of captivity. Elle's surgical wound from the militia ambush needed proper care. Even Rowan, despite her enhanced training, needed evaluation for the psychological trauma of 17 years in a program designed to create child soldiers. But they were together. And slowly, carefully, they began the process of becoming a family that had never had the chance to form naturally. The hospital recovery room fell silent as the 3 Ashfords held each other. A family that had been torn apart by war and deception, now reunited against impossible odds. Commander Hayes stood, his usual command presence softened by something Elle had never seen in him before: humility. Captain Ashford, he said quietly, 3 years ago your husband sacrificed himself so you could complete the mission. Today you sacrificed everything to bring your family home. We were wrong about you, about what makes a warrior, about what defines strength. Hartwell stepped forward, still on crutches. Ma'am, I called you a tree hugger, threw your warning in the dirt, and you still saved my life. Twice. His voice cracked. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. Elle looked at the young sergeant who dismissed her so cruelly. You came back for me on that mountain, Sergeant. You took a bullet saving Master Chief Mercer. You've already earned it. Frank Whitmore moved closer, and for the first time in 3 years, Elle saw tears in her mentor's eyes. He looked at Garrett, then at Rowan, then at Elle. Jonathan would be so proud of you, Ellie, he said, invoking her father's name. You brought your family home. You kept fighting. You became everything he believed you could be, and more. Elle reached out, pulled Frank into the embrace with her family. I couldn't have done it without you, Frank. You've been watching over me since I was 8 years old. Your family, too. For a moment in that hospital room, the ghosts of the past, Jonathan Brennan, the Marines lost in Syria, the 3 years of grief and isolation, were laid to rest. Not forgotten, but honored. Their sacrifices had led to this moment, to this family, to this second chance. Garrett pulled back slightly, his hand trembling as he reached for the pocket watch around Elle's neck. "You kept it," he whispered, "all this time." "Every day," Elle said. "I wound it every morning. It was the only part of you I had left." Garrett took the watch, held it to his ear. For the first time in 3 years, he heard his grandfather's watch ticking. The same watch that had stopped at 1437 in Syria, now brought back to life just as their family had been. He looked at Elle, at Rowan, at the watch. "Time to start over," he said softly. "All of us, together." "Together," Elle and Rowan echoed. Frank visited daily, bringing news and handling the bureaucratic nightmare of how to explain Garrett's resurrection and Rowan's existence to a military establishment that thought both were dead. "We're keeping it quiet," he explained. "Garrett stays officially KIA. Rowan never officially existed in the first place. And Ghost Hawk remains a legend that no one can quite prove is real." "The contractor facility?" Elle asked. "Destroyed. Evidence scattered. Most of the personnel escaped, but their infrastructure is gone. They won't be creating more child soldiers anytime soon." Frank paused. "But Elle, they're not the only ones. There are other programs, other facilities. This fight isn't over." "It never is," Elle said. But for the first time in 3 years, she didn't sound defeated by that reality. She sounded ready. 6 months later, in a hidden cabin in the Idaho mountains, 3 figures sat cleaning rifles in comfortable silence. Elle and Garrett side by side, moving in the synchronized rhythm of partners who'd spent years learning each other's patterns. And Rowan, watching them both, learning not just technique, but the thousand small gestures of love and trust that made a family more than genetics. Rowan had brought her own rifle from the contractor facility, a custom build that bore an engraving she'd added herself in the weeks after their escape. Elle noticed it one evening as they cleaned weapons together. "Legacy," Elle read aloud, tracing the lettering carved into the stock. "You named your rifle?" Rowan nodded, suddenly shy. "They let me build it when I turned 16. Said it was part of my training." She looked up at her mother. "I named it Legacy. I didn't know why at the time, but I think part of me knew I was carrying on something bigger than myself, something that belonged to both of you." Garrett reached over, squeezed his daughter's shoulder. "You are our legacy, Rowan, the best parts of both of us. And now you get to choose what kind of legacy you want to build." Frank visited every week, bringing intelligence and occasionally joining them for what he called training exercises, but what really meant making sure the Ashford family had everything they needed to keep protecting others from the shadows. The SEAL team visited once, bringing challenge coins and a ceremonial rifle plaque that read, "Ghost Hawk and Ghost Team. Never forgotten, always watching." Hayes had tears in his eyes when he presented it. Hartwell, still walking with a slight limp, simply saluted and said, "Thank you, ma'am, for everything." And sometimes, late at night when the stars were bright enough to touch, Elle and Garrett would sit on the cabin's porch while Rowan slept inside, and they would talk about what they'd lost and what they'd found, and what it meant to be given a second chance at the life that had been stolen from them. "Do you regret it?" Garrett asked one night. "Syria? The airstrike? The 3 years apart?" Elle was quiet for a long moment, her hand finding the pocket watch she still wore, the one that had stopped at 1437 on a burning afternoon 3 years ago. Garrett had wound it for her on their first day back together, and now it ticked with steady precision against her chest. "I regret the time we lost," she said finally. "I regret that Rowan grew up without parents who chose her. I regret the pain and the grief and the 3 years of thinking you were dead." She turned to look at him, her mismatched eyes reflecting starlight. "But I don't regret the mission. I don't regret the 43 operations where I saved American lives from the shadows. And I don't regret becoming Ghost Hawk, because maybe, in some way, all of this had to happen so we could become who we needed to be." "And who's that?" Garrett asked. Elle smiled, the first truly peaceful smile she'd managed in 3 years. "A family of ghosts, protecting the people who protect others, operating from the shadows because that's where we do the most good." A radio crackled from inside the cabin. Rowan's young voice, alert despite the late hour. "Mom? Dad? We've got incoming communication. Convoy under attack, coordinates coming through. They're requesting Guardian Angel support. Elle and Garrett looked at each other, then stood as one. They moved to the cabin, where Rowan already had their rifles laid out. Vigilance, reckoning, and legacy. 3 generations of warriors, bound by blood and training, and the shared mission of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Frank's voice came through on the secure channel. Ghost Team, this is Overwatch. Convoy is pinned down. Heavy casualties expected. They need you. Elle picked up Vigilance, felt its familiar weight settle into her hands like coming home. Beside her, Garrett took up his spotting equipment with the practiced ease of someone who'd never really stopped being an operator. And Rowan, their daughter, checked her rifle with movements that perfectly mirrored her mother's. Evidence of genetics and training combining into something extraordinary. Ghost Team copies, Elle said into the radio. We're moving to position. Tell the convoy to hold on. The ghosts are coming. They moved into the darkness. 3 shadows among shadows, invisible and unstoppable. Behind them, the cabin stood empty, just another anonymous structure in the vast Idaho wilderness. No indication that it housed legends. No sign that Ghost Hawk had ever been there. But in the mountains and deserts and forests where American forces operated, word had begun to spread. A new legend was being born, whispered in the same tones as the old one. The Ghost Team had returned. Not 1 operator, but 3, moving with synchronized precision that made them seem superhuman. A mother who'd never stopped fighting, a father who'd survived the impossible, and a daughter who'd escaped her creators to find her true purpose. They didn't ask for recognition, didn't want credit, didn't need the world to know they existed. They just needed American soldiers to come home alive. And as long as warriors needed protecting, as long as good people faced impossible odds, Ghost Team would be there in the shadows, watching, waiting, ready, because some legends don't die. They just learned to fight beside the people they love most, united by purpose and family, and the simple truth that some warriors are born, some are made, and the very best are given a second chance to become something greater than they ever imagined. The mountains kept their secrets, and Ghost Team kept their promise, forever watching, forever protecting, forever ghosts who chose to haunt the darkness so others could walk in the light. And somewhere in those mountains, if you listen carefully on the right frequencies, you might hear 3 voices coordinating in perfect harmony. A family reunited, a legacy continued, the guardian angels of America's warriors, operating from the shadows where they belonged, asking nothing in return except the knowledge that good people made it home to their own families. Because that, in the end, was what made the sacrifice worthwhile. That was what made the ghosts keep fighting. That was what made them heroes, even if the world would never know their names.